Okay. All right, everybody. We're going to wait a minute and let folks filter in. I have to apologize. That was a first. We had an issue with I logged in about 5, 10 minutes early, and we had this black screen, and we couldn't get out of it. And I asked her to remove me from the meeting, not realizing that once you remove somebody from a meeting, there is no way to get back in. We were trying to fix the glitch. Um, but it's a security feature that Zoom has that once you are thrown out of a meeting, there is no way back in. And she tried inviting me with every different email, my personal email, and I was completely shut out there's no way back in the meeting. So I'm glad Zoom has the security feature to get rid of hooligans who are trying to break into meetings, but it's tough when you're the presenter and you unintentionally get yourself out of the meeting. So now we're back. I'm gonna wait another minute. I see we have a few folks coming in. Everyone else, and if this runs late for you, I'm gonna record the webinar, go through my slides, go through Q&A, but if you have to leave early, we're gonna send you the full recording. Thank you so much for your patience. And let me see if I can get the Q&A here. Participants chat. Let me get the Q&A opened up. More question and answer. Here we go. All right, I think we're still okay. All right, we have up to 7 participants. We'll get a few more. We had, like 50 folks signed up, but we got a little poll for the few folks who are here. Are you a parent, a student, educator, and if so, what grade are you in? Okay, and once we get through that, I think I will go ahead and jump in and deliver the presentation. Again, thank you for your patience. That was a first. I've given probably 500 webinars on Zoom. I've never had that happen. It's always the first time. All right, here we go. Let's jump in without further ado. And again, there'll be Q&A at the end, but this is good information, and thanks again for sticking with us. To begin, we have to have the frame about testing that the world we live in is a test optional world predominantly. And that being said, test scores are having a rebound. We are not in 2021, it's 2025, and the world has shifted. So 3/4 of all schools in the country are test optional, but it doesn't mean that test scores don't have an impact on admissions outcomes and so forth. The broad conversation around testing, we have 2 big tests. We have the SAT and then we have the ACT. And over time, the SAT, since the pandemic, has rebounded quite nicely. And the ACT is trying to recover. And for that reason, they are overhauling their test entirely. There is a brand new test coming out called the Enhanced ACT coming in a few weeks. In like 3 weeks, it's here. The Enhanced ACT, it's not really enhanced, it's shortened. It's harder. There's going to be a digital version also available, which they released a few months ago. We've had a few rounds of the Enhanced Digital ACT, but it's going to paper in 3 weeks. So we have now the digital computerized SAT, and we have the paper. Predominantly, I prefer paper for the ACT. We'll talk about that and why. All right, so the world of selective admissions, we've been seeing this steady return, steady drip from test optional back to test required. All these great schools are now test required. And we're also seeing these flagships. We're seeing Tennessee, we're seeing UT Austin, the Georgia flagships, all the Florida schools, they've returned. And there are more coming. Every few months, we get another one who jumps back in. And I sense that after this admission cycle, we're going to see quite a few more schools coming back into the mix, both the private selectives and the state flagships. So this is definitely, things will never return to the world of 2019 when you had, over 1,000 test required schools. Now we have around 40 or 50. So it's a very different world. But these schools that are often quite desirable that people talk about, these are often the schools where tests are required. And beyond that, even when the tests aren't required, they're having an impact. And that's the conversation. So the momentum, you see what happened. I live in Atlanta, and Georgia was one of the first systems to bring back testing for UGA and Tech. Then they brought back a broader swath. They brought back, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, Kennesaw, other schools. And after Georgia came back, Georgetown. And Florida never left, because Florida, Bright Futures, they have all these scholarships tied to GPA and test scores. So Florida was never test optional. University of Florida, Florida State, Southern, all those schools have been test required all the way through. They were one of the only ones in the country to keep that, because during the pandemic, remember, kids couldn't get testing, and so the world went optional. But now testing is back, and so there's been a big return. There was some big research which came out, which pushed Dartmouth and then all the Ivies, Yale, Brown, Harvard, Cornell, Stanford. There were 12 schools with the Ivy Plus, and now 9 of those 12 schools are now back test required. Then this year we had Miami came back in the mix. Then we had Penn, UPenn, my alma mater, Ohio State, and then this summer Carnegie Mellon. And I was waiting for them because engineering schools, MIT, look how early they went back in 2022. So MIT went, and all these great engineering programs are now back test required, and there are more coming. And so we'll talk about that too, why that is. If you're curious about which schools might go back to test required, you can go on the common data set. You just Google any school in the country and type in like Princeton common data set, and it'll show you the percent of kids who are enrolled at Princeton as freshmen for the freshman class who sent test scores. And at Princeton, it's over 3/4. So this tells you that a school like Princeton, very selective, test scores matter. UNC Chapel Hill, 70%, 7 in 10 kids who are on campus as freshmen sent test scores. However, there are colleges like University of Connecticut where it's like 30%, where test scores aren't as important. But the schools who are very selective, test scores are making a difference, and the kids who are getting in, the majority of them have sent test scores. So that's meaningful to watch that. Now the rationale, why are we going back? The dean of MIT admissions, Stuart Schmill, was one of the first persons to come back and say, you know what, with all the grade inflation, we cannot predict who will do well at MIT without test scores. And without test scores, we're going to bring kids into MIT who are going to fail out. And that's a problem. Same thing in terms of over at Brown and over at Yale, that test scores are a better predictor than grades for these very selective schools. Not the case for schools who are much less selective, where GPA can be more impactful for predicting. But at these top schools, test scores are a better predictor. And we'll look at that. So this was the research out of Harvard, the Opportunity Insights, which was the Ivy Plus group. They analyzed about 1.7 million applications and kids who enrolled at these top Ivy Plus schools. The plus is Chicago, Stanford, Duke, and MIT. And they found that as your test score goes up, your GPA in college rises. Nice, strong correlation, good R value. But high school grades, that's a much weaker prediction. The R-squared value, the predictive strength of high school grades is much lower for these top schools. And so they said, you know what? Test scores are a better predictor for us if he'll do well in college than high school grades. And that's part and parcel due to the inflation in grades that we've seen over the past 10, 15 years. And the pandemic really put gas on the fire of grade inflation. One of the most compelling things to me was it wasn't just these elite schools, but UT Austin, one of the giant, 40,000 plus kids, massive state school. My sister went to UT Austin, great school. They found that for the kids who sent test scores and those who didn't, the kids who sent test scores had grade point averages at mid-year freshman year 0.86 points higher. So we're talking if the average with non-submitters was a 2.5, the average with submitters was a 3.36, which is very compelling. And the kids without test scores were much more likely to be on probation academically under a 2.0. They said, hey, we don't want kids coming to UT and failing out. For that reason, test scores are now required. So the fact that Texas and then, we have Ohio State, we're going to see more of these big state schools, especially big state schools who admit very selectively out of state. And that's like, Georgia Tech, and I'm waiting for UNC Chapel Hill. They have the option, and I think they'll probably exercise it in the next 2 years. But we're going to see more of these, elite, public Ivies going back test required, and especially schools in the South. We already have Tennessee and Georgia and Florida and Texas, and there's more coming. I'm waiting for Alabama, for Auburn, schools like that. I live in Atlanta, and down the street we have John Ladding, Dean of Admissions at Emory. He said, we don't trust grades as much as we used to. There's too much inflation. And what they're looking at are external objective measures, and that's going to be AP scores as well as SATs, things that are fixed for the nation. There's too much subjective influence on the grades. So we know that testing, even at schools that were optional, testing played a role. And they factor test scores in. It can increase the application strength, and especially for STEM kids. If you're looking at a student looking at applying to an engineering program, a computer science program, test scores, especially that math section, really matters. Or an engineering program, where they're looking at, can you handle differential equations? Can you handle, linear algebra? Can you handle much more advanced calculus? If you can't do well on the SAT or ACT, that easy math, you're going to probably really struggle when you come to differential equations and really advanced math. So that's the rationale why math matters a lot more for kids who are in STEM programs. Additionally, we know that for a lot of the southern schools, state schools, the test scores can directly affect merit-based aid. I always give the example at Alabama, where my niece applied and got in. She got a 1390 on the SAT, so she was eligible for the UA Scholar. And with that 3 point, she had well more than 3.5 GPA, which most kids do these days. And a 1390, her tuition went from out of state, as she lives in Richmond, from being $34,000 a year. Tuition then dropped to roughly $8,000 a year, and that is a much better number. And so that's a net savings of $96,000. And there's a reason that Alabama is stealing kids from Brown, stealing kids from Mount Holyoke or Oberlin, because of this, what a deal it is. So kids with good test scores and good grades can get these good deals. That's where testing, whether there's a pretty meaningful return on investment, if you're willing to forego the very, very top tier and go to a school like Alabama. And because of this, their freshman profile has gotten so much more impressive. They're stealing kids who would have gone to Rhode Island or go to Brown, and they're going to Bama. And now the freshman profile at Bama, so many kids have a 3.9 unweighted. It's amazing what's happened by the use of this very generous merit-based aid. So now the question is, should my kid then still prioritize test prep, given the world of test optional admissions? And part of it is, it depends on your kid, on where they're applying on their list of schools. But test optional does not mean test irrelevant, especially at schools that are more selective and rigorous. So there are many things that are optional. Having AP classes is optional. Leadership positions is optional, but impactful. So optional does not mean irrelevant. And that's a very important thing to remember. And here we see some examples of data. When the pandemic hit and all was new and test optional was new, you had these schools that have been test required for 50 plus years. And they were very candid, very forthright that, hey, we have this new thing of test optional. Let's give you information about that. And some of them were very transparent. They said, well, our kids getting in with test scores, like the Notre Dame, we're admitting kids at 20% admission rate. Without test scores, 11. So essentially it's double. And Emory, the same thing. All these schools now are more selective because these selective schools keep getting more selective. More and more kids are applying to these named schools for security and other reasons. But you see there's also a differential. Look at the difference for Boston College, where you have such a strong differentiating factor with getting in with test scores at BC, about 30%, about 1 in 3 kids. Getting in without test scores, about 1 in 10. So the admissions office at Boston College, they really put some weight on test scores, and they've actually changed their guidance from test optional to test encouraged, not required. Because again, some kids, there are a lot of reasons why they do this, politically and other things for diversity and so forth. But then look at Vanderbilt. Vandy is also a school very selective. Kids getting in though with test scores, 7%, without 6%. And so that delta is only 20%, not as much of a difference. So again, there are different philosophies at different places. Yale, they were test optional for multiple years, but they said later, we felt we were being disingenuous calling it optional, because we're letting kids in at a 6% rate with test scores and a 2% rate without test scores. So that's something that they didn't broadcast this. This wasn't on their website, but Jeremiah Quinlan mentioned it in a podcast for Yale admissions, which I listened to. I'm like, wow, that's very transparent. But he said we felt like we were being dishonest. And so you don't know necessarily what the policy is inside the admissions office, but ultimately it seems like if you're going to be conservative, you have to assume that schools that are more selective are putting more weight on testing, with the exception of schools like Vanderbilt, which for some reason they're not giving that same affordance, that same leverage to testing. All right, some schools give you clues. Grinnell said submitting scores may help you. If you don't submit a score, we have less information about that. BC, they changed their, they said we ran our institutional data, we ran regression lines, we found that, yeah, test scores predict pretty well. For that reason, students who complete the testings are encouraged. If you ever hear an admissions officer say encouraged or it helps, and you're a standard academic kid, you don't have some real hook that they want from you, you're not filling some niche for the university, you have good grades or well-rounded kid, that means they want to see scores. So, you're encouraged, recommended, it helps. And you're an average kid from a regular school, typically that means you want to see it. If you're first generation or you're an amazing quarterback, there are different reasons, and that there's less pressure on the testing. So more students are now submitting test scores using strategy. My niece got a 1390 on the SAT, and the Tulane rep said, we don't want to see anything under a 1430. And so she didn't send it in, and she got in with some merit aid, still expensive, but she sent test scores to Georgia, where they were required, to USC, South Carolina. She sent test scores to a few other schools, but it's, she was being very selective. My 1390 helps me here and hurts me here. And that really, kids are getting that, and parents are getting that. And so part of it, you want to look at that middle 50 percentile. And the way you find that, you just type in, there's a website I use a lot called College Board Big Futures, where they aggregate all the data from the common data sets. Type in any school in the country, Grinnell, Princeton, Michigan State, Georgia Tech. And then under the admissions tab, it'll give you that middle 50% range where half the kids are in that range in the middle. And then you have a quarter below and a quarter above. But that middle 50 really tells you, is my test score competitive or not? And if you're under that middle 50 range, you're in the bottom quartile, your test score, I probably wouldn't submit it again unless you're underrepresented, student from very disadvantaged high school. In which case, you're getting they want a 1250 to 1380. You have it 1150, but the average test score in your high school is like 1,000. Then your 1150 could be very strong, and they use a tool called Landscape to put your high school in context and your test score in context of your high school. So your 1100 could still be competitive if you're in this small school in South Dakota where the average test score is 1,000. You still did pretty good vis-a-vis. So it's under what the school accepts, but you're doing great for your cohort of kids. That's the Landscape tool. Now, the Common App, this year, we are seeing changes. This number, test submitters, they were in the 30s and low 40s, but now for the first time, we're back. And kids in the Common App, which is over a million kids, we have 55% of those kids are sending test scores, and only under half are now taking tests and withholding them. And so we're seeing more and more students realizing that test scores, although the world is optional, they understand that optional doesn't mean irrelevant. Optional can still move the bar for your acceptance letter or for merit-based aid. So more and more kids, and I think this number will keep rising next year and the year beyond. And it might get up to over 60% as kids are getting it. Oh, test scores still make a difference, even though they're optional. Like so many things are optional, but make a difference. Like APs are optional and so forth. Now, for certain kind of kids, if you have a student in this category, testing matters more. And because of the quantitative element. Engineers, testing matters a lot because you have to do some very advanced math. And if you can't do well on the SAT, HT math, you're going to probably struggle. And there's research on that at Harvey Mudd and research at MIT. If kids can't do well on these tests, they're going to probably have a hard time with the advanced math at MIT and Harvey Mudd and other schools. Business majors, they have to do finance. I took my Fin classes, Fin 1, Fin 2. It's all derivatives, it's all calculus. And if you can't do algebra, it's going to be harder for you. STEM students in general, computer science kids especially, and it really is that math score. You want a good math score. The verbal matters less for the STEM kids, but if I'm going to be an engineer, I need a good math score. I would love to have good math course taking, AP scores that are strong, AB or BC calculus, these kind of things. So if they're looking at a kid who was an A in calculus, and this is real, in a 550 in math, they're going to question, does this kid have the rigor? Even though the teacher gave him an A, does he really have the chops or she have the chops to do well in this engineering program where the math is much tougher than what they, on the SAT. So I wrote an article. I don't know if you get our newsletter. If not, please do. It was why engineering program applicants can't count on optional admissions. And one of my slides here was this one, that are the top engineering programs in the country. Look how many are now test required. MIT, Stanford, Caltech, Austin, Carnegie Mellon, Purdue, Tech, Cornell, UPenn, Hopkins. And the UCs are test blind. They're in their own world. Michigan is optional, and then Illinois and A&M. I think A&M will go back test required after following the lead of UT Austin. So eventually, engineering programs, more and more of them are now required, but even the ones like Michigan, Illinois, and A&M, if it's not required, I think it still makes a difference. Also, we have Cooper Union. They went back test required for engineering applicants only. Again, look at that. Not for other kids, but engineering kids required. The Naval Academy, a third of the kids there are engineers, test required. All the academies are test required. And then one of my favorite things, Worcester Poly, I remember how political it was. They announced testing is not relevant. They said even testing can be harmful. Therefore, for 8 years, we are going test blind, which means we don't look at it no matter what. And then within 3 years, they drop that and they're back test optional because they understand that for a poly school, for Polytechnic school, where that's a STEM-based school, testing matters. And so who knows if the UCs will ever go back to test optional or test required. Their faculty wants them to, but there's a lot of politics out in California with the Board of Regents. But for right now, and then Caltech went test blind to test required. And so that tells you that these changes can happen. Can you apply early action and send test scores later? Or is it better to do regular and send after you get your grade? Well, when you apply early action, you're going to be applying with or without test scores. So you have to make a decision before you apply. You'd have to ask individual colleges if they would allow you to apply, because they're going to, review the application. And at a certain point, they're going to look at you in the context of your grades, your scores, and everything else. Can you send test scores later? It would have to be before they review your application. And that's honestly a question for different admissions offices, because some of them, they put you in different buckets if you have scores or not, whether you can send them or not later. That would probably depend on each school. So I can't give you a global broad answer. It's going to vary by college, honestly. All right. So for engineering kids, STEM kids, test scores matter more. And the very selective schools, that's the private schools and the public flagships, especially schools like UNC Chapel Hill, or out of state. Again, if they're a land grant school with the Morrill Act, they have to allocate a certain portion of the student body for the state. That was the deal. We give you land, you give other kids education. But they're bound, limited by, we can only let in a quarter of kids out of state, or 30%. They can change their charters some with petitioning. But out of state, like UNC, the acceptance rate is under 10%. Same thing with UT Austin. It's like so much lower. And when you see that, I wouldn't be surprised when those public Ivies go test required. So even if they're not requiring test scores, my understanding is that test scores still have a lot more weight. And that's why you see like UT Austin going test required, other schools, when you have this incredibly tight pool of kids, all these kids applying for these few coveted spots for the University of UNC Chapel Hill and UVA in Michigan and places like that. All right, now let's do a quick deep dive into the two assessments, and we'll just do a little bit of more information, then we'll kind of go broader again. Understanding you have these two tests that are so much shorter than they used to be. The SAT is 2 hours and 14 minutes. If you remember, a few years ago, it was 5 hours, the whole thing, with the essay and everything else. ACT, also, it's now going to be reading, English, math, science, as of in 3 weeks, is optional. You can take it or not. I advocate everyone take at least one, because the random school might require it. There are a few who want it. It's not, but most of them are going to be agnostic, send it or not. I'll tell you why about that. Now, there have been big changes in these two tests. The SAT overhauled itself completely when it went digital in 2023 in March. And the ACT is now new as of in 3 weeks, both paper and digital. We're still using these old concordance tables, but they're going to reconcord them in 2 years. But until then, colleges will still use that same comparison table, looking at those same percentiles. Now, the SAT, it's digital adaptive. Everyone takes the baseline test. If they get more than 2/3 right, they're going to go to a harder module next. If they get less than 2/3 right, they go to an easier module. Then there's a 10-minute break, same thing for math. Take the baseline test, which is a smattering of easy, medium, hard questions. Then it'll route you to an easier, hard, adaptive module. All right, now the ACT is available in paper and digitally. The digital test is non-adaptive. It's just shorter and linear, and science is optional. And so you can opt in or opt out. So if I get my ACT score, I'll say I got a 28 on ACT and I got a 32 on science. It's no longer part of my composite score. It's now separated out like a separate score. ACT, you have to move faster. The SAT is more generous with timing, and more kids finish the SAT without challenges. A lot more kids have to really move quickly on the ACT. The ACT has more items. You have 131 without science. With science, you're at 171 compared to 98. So the SAT is still short and sweet because it's adaptive, and you get there faster with fewer items. On the format, again, you have 2 sections, and then you have some experimental questions. Also on the ACT, you have actually many more experimental items, almost twice as many, that are baked in, which means there are fewer operational items than there used to be. Okay. Now, we believe at Apple Ruth that the paper version of the ACT is the way to go. Some kids, you're going to have an option of taking it digitally or taking it on paper. We like paper a lot better. And I think the interface is better. I think, this test was a paper-based test. The College Board totally overhauled and redesigned their test to fit into a computer. The ACT just pushed it and it didn't make the changes necessary. So I think if given the chance, and during a school day test, some kids will be forced to take a digital test. But if given the option, always choose paper until they make some real modifications. And I have some issues with Pearson's TestNav. It's not nearly as good as the Blue Book app. In some schools, like you can't bring your own device, and they're giving you a school-based device. We've had kids who go in there, and it's improper resolutions, cutting off part of the screen, or there are problems with the trackpads. So I don't like having to, rely upon the school to give me the device. And bring your own device. They promised it some places, but not all. So it's going to really vary based on the school you're taking it at. So for that reason, I really do like taking it on paper. Also, one problem that when you highlight things on the ACT, the highlights disappear. So I have 10 questions in the passage, but they're not durable highlights, which to me is very bad design. The reading, there are challenges with going to the right place in the reading. The College Board, they have the short, sweet format, a short little paragraph, 100 words or less, one question, new topic. Much easier, makes more sense, and works better. Additionally, the College Board gives you this great calculator called the Desmos calculator. Fabulous. Half the kids in the school, in high school, used across the country in their physics classes or other things. Desmos is a great, especially for graphing. The calculator they offer you on the Blue Book is way better, Desmos, than on the ACT. So there are so many reasons why the interface on the College Board's Blue Book app is just blows away the ACT's interface, which is why I like paper. Now, when it comes to the timing, there's the number of kids who are finishing is still problematic for certain sections. So we see that both English and math, the number of kids who are finishing really hasn't moved. But reading, more kids are finishing reading and more kids are finishing science with this new redesign. So that's meaningful. But still, we consider the ACT to be a much faster test. That the numbers here of how many kids aren't finishing is much higher on the ACT than it is on the SAT. And so I think timing is still a real factor. And now when it comes to the science section, getting rid of science is not really going to affect most kids. The science section on the ACT is not a true science test like AP Chem, AP Bio, AP Physics. And when you strip out the science score, the composite scores don't really change because the science section correlates so highly with reading and with math. So it's like it's not adding much to the strength of the prediction of who's doing well in college. So look at this. For the whole composite score, for the 1.4 million kids who took the ACT last year, the score with English, math, and reading, the average was a 19.5. If I throw in science, it only goes to a 19.7. 0.2 points is meaningless. And most colleges will find this too. They're going to run their own analysis and say, you know what, science doesn't give us very much, therefore we're not going to require it. But a few schools will still want it. Like if you're applying to Boston, to BU, they said, hey, we're optional. But if you take the ACT, you are required to take the science section. BU is out there on, there are a few schools like this. Colleges who don't care, so many schools don't care. I can do twice as many schools, Brown, Cornell, and Georgia Tech. They say we don't even care about science. And so if Georgia Tech says science is irrelevant, that tells you something, that it's not really a science test. The military academies are like science, whatever. There are a few schools who still do want it. And that's Georgetown, Pomona, BU. Florida wants it for the Bright Futures program. And it's recommended at Duke, Michigan State, and so forth. But your composite score going forward, science is stripped out. Your super scores, science is stripped out. And I think over time, colleges are going to really back off the science. And I think it might go the way of the SAT essay, just evaporate eventually as fewer and fewer kids take it. But for right now, with some of this ambiguity, and you don't know which schools, if you're applying to BU or not, just make sure you take it one time. Okay. There's one question about super scoring. Does it look bad having 3 AC tests versus 2 times? No. Colleges don't care if you take it 3 times, 2 times, or 1 time. There's no benefit. There's no, we like this 1-timer versus 3-timers. That's not what they care about. It's what number do you have for our freshman profile. It's, do you have that 31 that we want? We don't care how you get it. A few other things kind of broadly, there's definitely a lot of overlap. These 2 tests are still very similar in terms of the skills they're assessing in terms of for the English skills, the grammar skills, reading skills. some of the algebra and so forth. The SAT operates at an 11th grade level of reading compared to a 9th grade level of reading for the ACT. So it's a more advanced reading test. You're going to see passages by Charlotte Bronte or Shakespeare sonnet, which you never see on the ACT. So harder reading on the College Board. ACT has a separate science section, and it has more advanced math. It's more pre-cal. So then ST is more algebra 2. So a little bit harder math on the ACT, a little bit faster, a little bit harder reading, a little bit less speedy, a little bit easier math. So there are differences. And so one thing when it comes to SAT, algebra 1, algebra 2, weigh a lot heavier. Trig and geometry, bigger deal on ACT. And then they both have some analysis, some light stats, looking at some scatter plots, looking for trends and so forth, a little bit of, so forth. So the heart of algebra is the essence of the SAT. ACT, they throw out some more advanced concepts. They have matrices, they have some, that's algebra, that's pre-cal, conic sections, it's more advanced trig, and there's triangles, ellipses, conic sections, parabolas, hyperbolas, domains and ranges of functions, lines of best fit. So this is all math you never see on the SAT. This is harder math. All right, SAT, you have your Desmos calculator, but some kids still bring their own. It's nice to have your own for doing, like Desmos is amazing for graphing, but for doing like, looking at mean, median modes, your own calculator is probably a little better than Desmos for a certain reason. There's one question, can you send colleges some of your test scores, but not all of them? Yes, it's called score choice. And many of them are, self-reporting. You actually just write down the scores you want them to see. And when you're accepted, then you send the official score reports score choice is essentially ubiquitous. So if you're taking the SAT, you have to learn how to use Desmos. It'll help you on over half the problems on the math section and help you solve them faster. Here's one example, like here's a equation systems, 2 lines. They say, what's the value of y? I could manipulate the equations, do some adjustments, or I just plug them in the calculator, and then boom, the intersection of x and y is at 3. So my y value is 3. Boom, I don't have to do any more math, no algebra. Just plug it in Desmos, and you solved it. There are many, many, many ways of using Desmos to get answers, so learn it, use it, practice it. The passages on the SAT, they're short, 150 words, bam, bam, versus much longer passages, 10 questions apiece, 15 on English, so longer form, which is one of the reasons why it's harder on the computer on the screen versus nice, short, sweet passages on the SAT. And there is a very predictable range and reading and writing is now 1 score, whereas they're separated out on the ACT. You have a separate reading skills, then you have separate English, that's just grammar, versus on the SAT, it's all combined. You go through craft and structure, that's essentially going to be words in context, reading, then you go to inference questions, evidence questions, then you shift over to a little bit of grammar, boundaries, form, comma, sense, structure, and then some reading skills there of transitions and synthesis and so forth. So that's the structure of the SAT. SAT, you have this nice little feature where you can flag things, you can see where you are right at any moment. What did I guess? What did I leave blank? There's never any getting off gridding, no more scantrons, which I like. And there are easier and harder modules. Let me just give a quick example of this. The baseline module for math looks like this, mostly middle, level 2 and 3 questions, only a couple really easy ones, and a couple 3 really hard ones. Then if I get more than a third wrong, I'm going to the easy module, which looks like this, where now they push me, I get 7 level 1s, not 2. I get 9 level 2 questions, and then I get, I get 5 level 3s and only 1 level 4. If, however, I get to the hard module, it looks like this. I get not 7 level 1, I get 1 level 1. I don't get 9 level 2, I get 4. But they're really pushing me more towards level 3 and 4 questions. So it feels different, looks different, and things count at a different level. And so one of the things, though, they don't, on the SAT, different than the ACT, every item now counts its own weight. It's algorithmic weighting. And so number 13 might count this, number 15 might count twice as much. And so different items have a different weight, and they never tell you that. And so the reason that's meaningful, the score return looks like this. They never tell you how many you got right. They never tell you which ones you got right. They never even tell you if you went to the easy or the hard module. The one way you can tell on a given section If I get over a 660 on either the math or the verbal, then I went to the hard module, because you're capped out. If they kick you down to the easier module, you can't, your ceiling, you've missed too many to get over a 660. And that's the one way you can tell. Otherwise, though, they give you no information about it. That's the thing with adaptive testing. Now, we have really rich, robust feedback on our practice tests, and we have practice tests coming up this weekend, and they're free. And we're going to give you really rich, robust feedback, item by item, what you missed, why you missed it, and so forth. How do you prep? There are 7 practice tests now that are good on the Blue Book app. On the college, it's free. Let me see them all tonight. And make sure you practice Desmos, very important. We believe fully in having everyone taking a dual baseline. Everyone take a practice SAT, 2 hours, 14 minutes. Everyone do a practice ACT on 2 different weekends, or even the same weekend if you're up for it. And then we line them up and you see where you are. If you're within 60 points, you're in the margin of error on both tests. Each test has a margin of error by 30 points, the standard error measurement. But if I combine those and I'm beyond that, then I have an advantage. So if I have a 1200 SAT, but I get a 29 on the ACT, I'm going ACT all the way to college. I'll never look back. If, however, I get a 1200 SAT and a 1230, that could switch on a given day. So in that range, I'll ask the kid which one felt better, more natural, more comfortable, and go with that. But when there is that real, a real market advantage, you go with that test all the way to the bank. And that's, from there. Your testing plan should include 3 tests in either the SAT or the ACT. There is no advantage to having both. Colleges don't care. If all they care about, do I have the score for my freshman profile? Do I have that 1350? Do I have that, whatever the number is? They don't care how you get there. But having 2 scores, that doesn't really help you. We're seeing kids get into every school in the country, Stanford, Harvard, MIT, with 1 test score. 2, it's different with APs. Sending a bunch of 4s and 5s, if I send 7 of those, that's more meaningful than sending 1 of those. But on the SAT, ST, it doesn't really get, once you check the box for testing for the admissions tests, you check the box. And some kids are 1 and done, some are 2 and done, but there's something called super scoring, where if I have little variations in scoring over the course of 3 tests, they'll take my very best verbal and very best math and combine them, or my best 3 section on the ACT. And also, we found that there is a testing effect, that kids taking it more than once tend to get more comfortable, more confident, and do a little better each time, up to the 3rd test. And that was my doctoral research, where we evaluated thousands of kids. And by the 3rd test, you're essentially at your peak for the vast majority of kids. And then you're flatlining or even decreasing. So, but yeah, there definitely, there's a reason we recommend taking it 3 times. But if you get the score you want in 1, beautiful, you're done, love it. But just plan on 3, and often kids get more motivated. They see that their efforts are creating gains, and that makes them feel more self-efficacy, and that's reinforcing and motivating. All right, things that work. This is also my doctoral research, which I published in some journals. Mock tests, practicing works. So don't just do drills, do practice time tests. When you spread things out, kids do better than doing in mass. So if I'm going to do 30 hours of prep, better to do it over 8 weeks than do it in 1 week. The more time you spend, the better you do. You want to have momentum going in, and it always helps having a goal, because as you're approaching that goal with your practice tests, it's reinforcing and motivating. Testing plans. There are now 8 SAT dates. They just added, first time in history, a September SAT. So now you have 5 in a row. You have August, September, October, November, and December, 5 in a row, which is great. The August and September dates are perfect for early. And then October, November, December are great for regular decision. And then you have 7 dates for the ACT. The one caveat I want to throw out, if you are currently enrolled in Algebra 2 as a junior, you shouldn't take the SAT until March, and you shouldn't take the ACT until February. You need 1 solid semester of Algebra 2 under your belt before you even consider taking these tests. There's just too much algebra on there, and we don't want to be teaching it to you first. I'm happy to review it with you, but not teach you the basics of Algebra 2. Make sure you've had that class in high school. That's important. All right, and there are different study plans, different ways of doing it. Some kids do some prep in the summer and then wait for the real things later, and they do some refreshers. There are lots of different plans. Like, I was talking to a father 2 days ago. His kid is a football player, taking 5 APs, junior, heavy schedule. He's like, you know what? Well, our weekends, like Friday's football day, we could do some prep over the weekend, but maybe we'll wait until that first ACT, either in December or in February after the season. which to me makes sense. If you're a dedicated, serious athlete doing 2-a-day practices, is that the best time for your testing? Probably not. Or if you're the lead in the school play, I'd probably wait and look at the calendar and say, where does it make sense for me to take these tests? Okay. And yeah, and there is a September SAT. Okay, let me mark that one. Super scoring, again, kind of giving you an example of they're going to add up your best math, your best verbal, and that's the score they use to look at you in committee. That's super score. Very helpful. ACT super scores automatically. And again, going forward, science is now not part of the super score. Science is not part of composite. Science will be a standalone separate score. It's not tied to your composite score. All right. There's a question of, do I send my test scores in? Well, get your baseline test scores in first to figure out, are you close to what the college wants? If you're, they want a 31 and you're at a 20, I probably would go test optional. It's going to be a tough lift. If, however, they want a 31 and I have a 26, okay, you're in range. And we can work, we can get you, we can get you there with work and effort and so forth. But for sometimes that gap is so big, it's probably better to build a list of schools that they're test optional. And because sometimes it's too big of a lift. One of my colleagues and good friends here in Atlanta, Rick Clark, he said, if you're, the middle 50 or above, send the scores. But if you're at the bottom quartile, I probably wouldn't send that score. Go with your strengths. And so like for Colorado, their middle 50 is 1170 to a 1380. If I'm at 1270 or above, I'm over the midpoint, that score is going to be a good score. If I'm in the top quartile, it's a very good score. It's an asset in the application. If I'm in the bottom quartile, if I have an 1150, that's not going to really help me unless there's something special. I come from a school where the average test score was 1,000, and I was the best in the school, or I'm first generation or something special, or I'm the amazing quarterback. Otherwise, though, I'd probably withhold that score if given the option. The third quartile, that's where it depends. If I have a really great math score in there, my math is like a 700, my verbal is going to be a 560, and I'm applying to be an engineer, I want them to see that math score, and I'd send it. The converse, though, is let's say I have amazing grades. I have a 3.9 unweighted, and I have a ton of rigor. I have 10 APs, but I have a 1200. I'd want them to evaluate me on the merits of my outstanding unweighted grades and my academic rigor, and not have a relatively weak test score in the mix, especially if I have strong AP scores I can send to augment my application. And so there are definitely some factors involved. Some schools you apply to major. I think like over in Wisconsin, you're applying directly to a school. And so for that, if I'm applying to a STEM major and my math score is good, then I'd probably want them to see it, especially given the quantitative strength is so important to my engineering major or my pre-health or nursing program or things like that. We have a great thing happening this weekend. We are doing free practice testing and free study sessions. We're going to, so it's an hour-and-a-half session giving you tips and techniques for actual problems, going through here's the best way to handle this math, the best way, and so it's free. And you can scan this thing with your phone and register. And again, we're going to give you a full analysis and evaluation of your test and access to these really great recordings of like free tutoring, which normally we charge $175 for this. And this for August, we're doing a promo where we're just giving it away, and versus having kids sign up for these and pay for them. So I think it's a great deal. And again, some of our data about that. All right. And I think that is the end of my slide. So we went through the deck and here we go. I want to now open things up and make sure we're answering the questions. All right, so Tanya, the October tests won't be available for early action, but I assume we can still send hopefully help with merit scholarships. So here's the thing. It depends on the school for early. A lot of schools, they're going to have a drop dead date. They're going to tell you the last date we accept is going to be the September test. Some schools will accept October. And, in terms of if they have a November, there are differences. Here at UGA Athens, their deadline is October 15th, but some schools early is November the 1st. Depends on the school. And so I would look at their website to find out, but you can always know that September is safe for early. October it depends on the school. Can you still send help with merit scholarship? Yes. And there are schools like Mississippi, like Ole Miss, other places where you can, even after you're accepted, you got the offer of acceptance, you can still send a test score and still get a higher merit award. I've seen that too, where they have like the grid scholarships and higher testing can just help you bump into a higher category even after you're accepted. Because again, what they care about is when they report their freshman averages, that test score matters. It matters for recruiting. When they get better and better students, it affects a lot of things, their alumni base and so forth. So if, and that freshman profile really helps them. Okay. So what are other questions? I know I've answered some of your questions, and hopefully I can answer them all before we get out tonight. What else have I not answered? Okay, well, I think I've answered the questions. Is an AP score of 3 worth reporting? That will depend completely on the school. There are schools where, and what you want to do is go to the school and look up what they give credit for. There are some schools who will give you credit for a 3. Then there are certain schools where they give you no credit at all. If they don't give you credit for a 3, don't send them a 3. I would submit scores if and only if they give you credit or you're in the range. But yeah, like certain state schools, Georgia State, a 3 could be great. I'll give them my 3. But if I'm applying to MIT, don't give them the 3. That's not going to be meaningful. Give them the 4s and 5s for those top schools. But you can definitely do the research, Google the name of the school and what they give credit for, which AP scores. It's very simple, very fast. Can you explain Desmos again? So is that something they use to practice math questions with, or is it they can use during the test? So Desmos is a calculator that's used by about half of the high school kids in the US. They license it at high schools, they give them free licenses, and it's the best calculator in the country. For graphing, you don't have to enter things in the y equals mx plus b. Whatever you type in, it'll graph things. It's really a great calculator. So the College Board licensed that calculator, a reduced version, not the full scientific, all the suite of all the stuff, but they have a reduced Desmos baked in. So when I hover over the calculator icon in the Blue Book app, Desmos opens up right there, and I can move it around on the screen. It's great, and drop it right in. So Desmos will be there on the Blue Book app where they practice is going to be the exact same thing on the actual test. So the Blue Book app, you practice at home, on your laptop, on your desktop. When I go in for the actual test, I'm taking it using the exact same Blue Book app. So you practice with Desmos, and it'll be there on test day to help you. And so kids have, many kids know Desmos, but some kids don't. And if you don't, you better practice, because if you know how to use it, it'll save you so much time, and it'll get you answers faster. And we teach a whole unit on Desmos at Appleruth, how to get, techniques, tricks, how to back into answers with Desmos, how to graph things. It's a very powerful tool to use. And so kids should practice on it, getting ready for the SAT. All right, the school that gives the SAT in October, does the location matter? No, that if they're giving it, location doesn't matter at all. School day is the same as National Test Day. They're the same test. They don't care. And the College Board's been very aggressive getting more and more tests on the school day. About 2/3 of kids in the country are taking it on a school day. And that's from savvy, partnerships and outreach and marketing. If we signed up for the SAT and said we'd be on one type of device, a Chromebook, but now we want to use our own laptop, do we have to change registration? If you want to use your own laptop, I would reach out to customer service and I would email them. It may vary. If you go in there with your device, and then they're going to offer you the Chromebook, but if you have yours and you've already preloaded everything, once you enter the school's code, it's going to unlock it. But I would go ahead and just reach out. I would email the info at the College Board, or just respond to that registration email and just ask them, and they'll tell you with certainty. But I don't think it's going to be a problem to do that. All right. For the PSAT, is it shorter and faster? No, it is the exact same. The PSAT is the exact same timing and format and questions as the SAT. It's just different scoring. So it's same number of questions, same timing, same time per question. The only difference is the scoring's out of 1520, not out of 1600, and they withhold a little bit of trig, and they withhold the most advanced science reading. Otherwise, it's identical. So taking the PSAT feels exactly like, except for you'll see a couple of trick questions on the SAT. That's it. Can you explain National Merit Scholarship? National Merit Scholarship is roughly the top half to 1% of students in the country. It's given to about 9,000 kids across the US, and it's allocated by state. So the National Merit cut scores are going to depend on your state. So the states where it's very tough, that's the tri-state, New Jersey, New York, California, Connecticut. The states where it's a little bit easier, so their cut score might be, a 223, 224, which is they double the verbal and add math. And then, you can look online for that, for the National Merit cut scores. But it really it's for the top, like 0.5% to 1% of kids, and they allocated scholarships by population, by state. And so it really is, not that meaningful like it used to be, where there is an award, a one-time award of $2,500 if you go through. And once you have the National Merit score, the cut score on the PSAT, then they ask you to take a confirmatory SAT to get the score you need to confirm there wasn't a fluke. And then you write a little essay, and then you write a little thing. And then if you're selected, you go from National Merit semifinalist to finalist, and then to scholarship award winner. And then they give you a check for $2,500 to like 10,000 kids. So it's, a small thing, but honestly, what matters a lot is the SAT. What matters much, much less is National Merit. It mattered more years ago when kids, they used to brag about, we have so many National Merit scholars, but now no one really talks about that. So it's still just a way for this corporation, the National Merit Scholarship Corporation, to allocate their money. They're using this test to allocate, a handful of million of dollars to smart kids. So don't worry about it. It's not really a big deal. If you are a great tester, you're in the, and then I would prep for the PSAT, because again, it's a couple $1,000s. But what matters more is I get a 1550 on the SAT versus I get, a 1480 on the PSAT and get the National Merit Award, because that 1550 matters a lot more, because the PSAT is not a college admissions test. It's only for your edification, for your knowledge base, and for this National Merit Scholarship Corporation to give you some money for the top 10,000 kids in the country. But again, this is the top. There are a couple kids. If there are 100 kids in the class, it's going to go to the top few kids, right? There's a school here, Westminster in Atlanta, that they might get 10 a year for their, whatever the number is, but it's not that meaningful like it was like 25 years ago when it was a bigger deal. Okay. Are there any other questions? That's a PSAT. What else have I not answered? Anything else? Did I answer all the questions? It's now 9:19. And again, I want to thank you for coming out late. That was quite a pretty wild ride. For 20 minutes, I was locked out. And thanks for going with us here. Won't happen again, and I'll be giving more talks. That really is the first time it's happened in hundreds of Zoom webinars. All right, and so just a quick poll. If you want any support from us, let us know. We are very happy to reach out. And again, this weekend, if your kid has time, do a practice test. And again, you can sign up and we'll send you the recording to this free practice sessions, like getting an hour and a half of free prep, which is pretty great. Okay, so I think that is going to be the wrap. And again, thank you very much for coming out. And if there are any other questions, please reach out to us. We're happy to help, and look forward to the next one. All right, everybody, have a good night.